Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents 6 Steps to Total Self-Healing, The Inner Bonding Process by Margaret Paul, Ph.D. Narrated by Margaret Paul, Ph.D.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm going to start with sharing a little bit about my background so you get to know me a little bit and what brings me to this place right now. So I was born on a farm in upstate New York to very clueless parents. And in fact, my mother went to a doctor 3 months after they got married to get birth control and found out she was pregnant. And so one of the things I always heard was, "Oh, you were the best mistake that ever happened." Of course, as a kid, all you hear is mistake, right? And I was an only child. So on some level, they were glad. But so I was on the farm and I have a very good memory. So I can remember being outside in the playpen and just feeling this incredible sense of oneness with nature and feeling so much peace in being out there. And my father's father, my grandfather, he was a person that my mother didn't like him at all, and from what I've been told, I was the only person he ever loved. And so he would come by every day, and I remember sitting on his lap and feeling his heartbeat and feeling the connection, feeling a very, very special kind of connection. But when I was a year old, 13 months old, we left the farm and came to Los Angeles. My parents were very poor. I never saw my grandfather again. Surprisingly, went back to the farm when I was 10, and I said, "My grandfather used to walk down that road." And my parents were just absolutely stunned that I knew that. But he died a few years later, and he might have been as heartbroken as I was. And of course, when you're 13 months old, you don't know that you're the one that left. So in my mind, he left me. And I got very ill. I got very, very ill, life-threateningly ill when we moved, almost died. And so, when you're young, you develop beliefs. And one of the beliefs that I developed was that if somebody I love leaves, I'm going to die. So that laid the groundwork for me to become a very good girl. We decide fairly young what our protection strategies are going to be. And mine was to be a caretaker, to tune into everybody else and try and make sure everybody else was okay. And I learned to completely ignore my own feelings. Because in my household, my mother was quite narcissistic. She was a screamer. And I was the only child. She would scream. My father was a pretty good father for the first 12 years of my life. And then he got it into his head that it was his right to have sex with me. So I had to stay away from my father. He was the only person that I could go to up until then. So after 12, I was on my own. My grandmother lived with us, and she was horrible. And so I was always just trying to stay away as much as I could. So it was a very, very lonely and scary childhood in many ways because I was very sensitive, as I'm sure many of you are, and the yelling and the lack of caring about my feelings at all I was a very tense child. And so by the time I was 5, I had all kinds I bit my nails and had a nervous cough and I couldn't sleep. And so my mother took me to a psychiatrist because obviously it was my problem. And I'll never forget this tall, skinny guy, after talking to me and talking to my mother, he said to me, "Tell your mother not to yell at you." And I remember thinking, I'm 5 years old. She is not going to listen to me. You tell her. And then my next thought was, I can do a better job than you. And that's when I decided to do this work. That was the day. And I never wavered from it. And I was the kind of kid that other people came to, kids came to, even adults, with their problems. I was just that kind of kid that would listen and would be there. So I grew up being there for everybody else and not being there for me. And you know what caretakers do? How many of you grew up being a caretaker? Taking care of everybody else's feelings. Yeah, quite a few people. So here's what caretakers do. Caretakers are usually with the other side of the wounded coin. Being a caretaker is coming from the ego-wounded part of us. It's a form of control to try and get love and avoid pain. And usually we attract somebody on the other end of that spectrum who's a taker. So what takers do, let's say this is your feelings. Your inner child is your feeling self. And so the taker goes, here, it's your responsibility to make me feel like I'm okay, to validate me or have sex with me or love me in the way I want to be loved. And so the taker says, okay, I'll be that person. I'll take care of you, but I'm going to take my feelings, my inner child, and I'm going to put them in a closet with the hope that you're going to come and take care of my feelings. Now, those of you who are caretakers, how often did that happen? It doesn't happen, does it? It never happens. And after a while, you just get depleted. You feel like a martyr. That's how I felt. I got depleted. I felt like a martyr. I'm giving, everybody else is taking. But that's what I grew up with. That's what I knew. And I went into psychoanalysis when I was 18, 4 days a week on the couch for 4.5 years. And after 4.5 years, my analyst, who was a very nice person, but if you know anything about psychoanalysis, they don't say much. I talked, he listened. And after 4.5 years, he said, you're analyzed. So I took that to mean that I was ready to get married. So I met my husband, and we fell madly in love. And we were madly in love for about 3 weeks. And I spent the next 30 years trying to get that back. And during that time, I learned a lot. And I'm very grateful for that time because it created the basis of the work that I do now, created the basis of inner bonding. Because at some point, I started to see that there were moments when we would connect again. And I started to take a look at what was happening when we connected. And I saw that when we connected, we were both very open. We were in our heart. We were open. But that the rest of the time, we weren't. And that's when I created this concept that's the basis of inner bonding, of intention. That there are only 2 intentions at any given moment. And one is the intention to learn about loving yourself and then sharing your love with others. And the other is the intention to protect against pain with some form of controlling behavior. And I saw that if he came to me upset, angry, he was protecting, which we now call the ego wounded self. It's the ego part of us, but we call it the wounded self because sometimes ego has a bad connotation. And I saw that when he came to me in his wounded self, either angry or withdrawn or blaming, I would get triggered into my wounded self, which meant that, first of all, I would feel like deer in the headlights because that's what I learned with my mother when she was mad. I didn't know what to do. And then I would try and fix it. I would apologize, or even if I didn't know what I had done, and I would just try and do anything I could to make things better. Which, of course, I was training him to treat me badly because I was treating myself badly. But I didn't know that for a long time. And so I discovered this concept of intention about 7 years into the marriage. And that's when we wrote our best-selling book. And he was also a psychologist. Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You? And this book has sold over 1 million copies around the world. But here's the thing. It took us 7 years to write the book. And we fought almost the whole time. And so we were not doing a very good job. And people would write us and say, you know, your marriage, we were very transparent about it. Your marriage sounds like ours. And, but how do you stay open? How do you stay open to learning in the face of fear? Well, I didn't know the answer to that because I couldn't. I had so much fear when anybody got upset with me, angry with me, yelled at me. I had so much fear that I couldn't stay open to learning. I had no idea how to do that. And that's when I started to pray for a process. Now, I had already been practicing, became a psychotherapist, practiced traditional therapy for 17 years. And I was not happy with the results at all. I was not happy. I mean, I had gone into so many different kinds of therapy after the psychoanalysis because I wasn't happy. The marriage wasn't happy. I thought it was all my fault. And I was always looking to, you know, what do I need to do? What do I need to change? How do I need to do things better? But I wasn't finding the answers in all the different forms of therapy that I did. And with the 17 years that I was working with traditional psychotherapy, I was not happy with the results. So I started to pray for a process. By that time, well, let me go back a little bit. My parents were atheists. And my grandmother, she was an Orthodox Jew, and her God was very punishing and judgmental. My parents had no belief system, and they were always fighting for my allegiance. And I looked at both of them and said, I didn't see what either of them believed as making them happy. And so at some point in my early 20s, I got onto a spiritual path, and I got a guru, and I joined a meditation group, and I did all that stuff. Nothing was really working along with all the traditional psychotherapy. That's when I started to pray for a process that would work fast and would work deep and where people could learn it and use it on their own, where they didn't have to keep coming to a therapist every time something happened and they couldn't handle it. I knew there must be something. And that's when I met the co-creator, Dr. Erica Chopich. She's the co-creator of Inner Bonding. And of course we had to meet because she had half the process and I had half the process. And she had grown up in a very difficult environment, and she knew from the time that she was young that she had an inner child that she had to take care of. I didn't know that. I was so external. I didn't know that. So we met, and Spirit kind of brought in the inner bonding process. And over a number of years, it evolved into this very, very powerful 6-step process, which is what I'm going to be teaching you this weekend. Now, this weekend is, it's like a first piano lesson. You're going to learn inner bonding, but like anything, like learning the piano, you have to practice. You don't just get it. So you're going to be learning the steps of inner bonding, and I hope you take this tool with you and bring it into your life because it is truly, truly life-changing. My whole life changed after I started to practice inner bonding. Everything changed. My health, I did not have good health at that time. I got extraordinarily healthy. I found joy for the very first time in my life. Now, another very interesting thing happened, and that is that I was a sickly child, and I hated being sick. So in my early 20s, I started to read about what creates health. And fortunately, I read a book called The Poisons in Your Foods, and I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and I knew they were right. And I threw everything out of my kitchen, and at that time there was one little health food store in Los Angeles where I was living, and that's where I shopped. And so I started eating only organic when I was 22 years old. That was 58 years ago. I'm now 80.
Wow.
And I've been eating organic since then.
Sign me up.
And my health, huh?
Wow, sign me up.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I was with a friend the other day and said, I'm going to have what you have. So I feel very fortunate that I found out about this so long ago, because my health is extraordinary. My energy is extraordinary. But the other thing that happened with this, which took me a long time to connect the dots, is that, so I started eating only organic. I've been doing that for all these years. And then inner bonding came in. And so when I met Erica, I found out that she came from a science background, but she had this ability to look at you, and she could see your aura, she could see the colors. She thought everybody could do that. She didn't know that that was a special gift. And so when she found out, she called things like that hooey-wooey. She didn't want to have anything to do with hooey-wooey stuff. But as we started to create inner bonding, we realized that part of doing this process is being loving to yourself. But we didn't know how to do that. She didn't learn it in her family. I didn't learn it in my family. I mean, we barely knew what love was. How do you find out what love is? When you grow up in a family that's not loving. So we realized that, I realized that I needed to be able to access a higher source of information about what was love, what was loving to me, what was loving to others. Now, I had been trying to do this. I had been listening to tapes about opening the channel, and I was with the guru and everything, and I was trying so hard to connect to a source of guidance. And every once in a while, I would feel something would come in, but it was just sort of accidental. I mean, I didn't know how to make it happen. I didn't know how to have at will divine connection. And I wanted that. So when I met Erica and we started to develop inner bonding, and I realized that what I had learned about intention, see, I thought the intention to learn was learn about other people. I didn't realize that it was about really learning about myself and learning about taking care of myself. So as I started to practice that, I became able, well, let me backtrack a minute. So Erica, at one point, she lived in LA, but then she moved to Santa Fe. And one day she called me up in the morning and she said, "Oh my God, you'll never believe what happened last night." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I got in bed and there was this old Indian lady at the foot of my bed, and I thought she was a homeless person. And I said, 'Who are you? And why are you in my bedroom?' And she said, 'I am your spiritual master teacher, and I have come to teach you.' I said, 'Oh my God, that's what we've been hoping for. What did you do?' She said, 'I told her to leave me alone and go haunt you.' I don't want this hooey-wooey stuff." Well, anyway, the woman kept coming back, and finally Erica accepted that, in fact, she had known her as a child, and this being had helped her through a very rough childhood. So she started to be able to have contact with this woman, and then she started, like one day she came home from the market. She says, "Oh my God, I was in the market. It was so crowded. I could see everybody's teachers, and I could see all their power animals flying around." And she was just overwhelmed with this. She didn't know how to handle it. So I started getting very jealous. I wanted this. And so one evening I was lying in bed. I wasn't feeling real well. I was wearing a pink sweat outfit in bed, and I was talking to her on the phone. And I said, "Well, you're seeing other people's teachers. Maybe you can see mine." She said, "Well, I'll try." So there was silence in the phone, and all of a sudden she said, "Whoa, this is weird." She said, "I'm in my house, but I think I'm also in your house. Are you lying in your bed wearing a pink sweat outfit?" Talk about hooey-wooey. So she introduced me to, she said, and your teacher is working on your body. So she introduced me to this being. And then I realized I had seen her. I'm an artist and I paint, and I had seen her at times when I was painting. So I said to her, well, how do I have contact? How do I connect with her? And she said, well, tonight get in the bathtub and imagine that you're painting. Get into that creative state. So I did. Got into that creative state, and I started asking questions, and answers started coming. And it was amazing. And the next morning I said, well, do I have to be in the bathtub to do this? And she said, no, it's the state. And then I realized, oh, it's the intention to learn. That's the state. So I really started to practice that very diligently, to practice really being open to learning about my own feelings, open to learning about what was love, what was loving to me. And I started to have this access quite easily. I got all excited, and I thought, wow, I'm going to help my clients to have this access to their spiritual guidance. Except it didn't work that way. So I got confused. Okay, I thought you just opened to learning and you're going to have this access. Why wasn't it happening? Took me a while, like I said, to connect the dots and realize this is about frequency. This is about raising your frequency. The intention to learn raises your frequency because spirit exists at a higher frequency than we do. But our bodies have to be in a high frequency. And mine was because I'd been eating organic food all that time. But most people are eating, they're eating McDonald's, they're eating fast food, they're eating food with pesticides, they're eating, well, at that time there weren't so many GMOs, but now they're eating foods with GMOs, and they're eating processed packaged foods with sugar, foods with processed oils. All of these foods lower the frequency of the body, often making it very hard to connect. Even if somebody is truly open to learning, if their body is in a low frequency, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to connect. So I finally got that it takes these two things, which I wrote about in my book that came out last year, Diet for Divine Connection, that it takes these two things. It takes both eating really cleanly to keep the frequency of your body high and being open to learning. And when you do those two things, you will be amazed at how easily you start to connect with your higher guidance if you're truly open to learning about loving yourself. It's very specific. It's not about being loving in the world. That comes later. But it has to start with what's loving to you. Because if you're not loving yourself, if you're just going out in the world, you're going to be trying to get love from other people, and then that becomes controlling. So that was an amazing realization for me. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be working with you about. So I'd like you to open up your workbooks and take out the life paths chart. And we're going to start on the back of the chart. The life path looks like this, and the back of the chart says inner bonding definitions. So I'm going to do the definitions on the bottom of the chart. And this is so we can all get on the same page. Some of you know this and some of you don't. So I just want us all to be on the same page. So when I talk about the core self, there's a lot of different words. Your true self, your essence, your soul, your inner child. And I might use them interchangeably. It doesn't matter. It's the same. It's this beautiful spark of the divine that is who we really are. This is who we are. This is our soul. This is the immortal part of us. We are not what our lower brain, which is where the wounded self is, here in the amygdala. We're not what that programmed part of us thinks we are. We are a part of whatever you want to call God, spirit, divine, universe, whatever you want to call that. We have that inside of us. And this part of us, which one of the reasons that we can call it an inner child is because we know we have to take responsibility for a child. But we don't always know that we have to take responsibility for our own feelings. And this part of us often communicates through feelings. So our feelings are a source of guidance. Our feelings have an enormous amount of information for us, as you'll see as we get into the workshop. So that's who we are inside. That part of us just wants to be out and express who we are. Came bounding into the world to learn to love, evolve as a loving human being, and express the gifts that we've been given. And we came in expecting that we were going to get seen and loved. But unfortunately, many of us did not. Because if your parents didn't know who they were inside, they couldn't see who you were. And what happened with many of us is that our parents projected their woundedness, their not good enough feelings about themselves onto us. And we absorb that. And so that wounded part of us, the basis of the wounded self, is I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'll never be enough. I'm flawed. I'm inadequate. And that's the next, here, this is the wounded self, the next part, on this chart. And so the wounded self is the part of us that was programmed with many, many false beliefs about ourselves, about what we can and can't control, about other people, about spirit, many false beliefs. And many of us operate from these beliefs without realizing that we're actually being controlled and limited by these beliefs that we absorbed. These beliefs get absorbed into this part of the brain, the lower part of the brain called the amygdala. This is where the fight or flight mechanism is. This is where we feel the fear that triggers us into that. And this is the place that houses our wounded self, which comes from fear. The wounded self knows nothing about love and nothing about truth. And it's really important to start to understand that, because this wounded part of us thinks it's the voice of knowledge, thinks it's the voice of truth, of information. It's got a pretty loud voice and it says, well, you're no good, or who do you think you are, or you're a loser, and, you're going to end up on the streets, or, if you act this way, then people will like you, and if you're perfect, then people will like you, and then you'll be okay. I mean, the voice is very demanding and it's a pretty loud voice, whereas the voice of spirit is much softer. But one of the ways we know the difference is that the voice of the wounded self creates anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, anger, aloneness, emptiness, jealousy, all these painful feelings that we call in inner bonding the wounded feelings, because we create them from how we treat ourselves and what we tell ourselves from our wounded self. And so this part of us can be many ages, depending on when you learned a belief, when you absorbed it, depending on when you learned a particular addiction or protection against pain. If you started smoking when you were 12, then when you smoke, you're operating out of your 12-year-old. You start drinking at 15, then when you're drinking, you're operating out of your 15-year-old. You learn to be a good girl or boy when you were 2 or 3. When you're doing that, then you're operating out of that young place. And so the wounded self has many ages, all the way through adolescence into early adulthood. And we can be these different ages at different times, depending on what gets triggered. Maybe you learned to have tantrums when you were very small, and then that's your go-to when you're scared, when you're threatened, is that you get angry and you try and control with anger. So we all have a wounded self, and part of what inner bonding is about is healing the false beliefs, because the more you heal the beliefs and operate out of truth, the happier you are, the lighter you are, the freer you are. That's what emotional freedom is when we're operating out of the truth, not out of the false beliefs of the wounded self. And these beliefs, you'll see as we go through inner bonding, that when we're upset, that's when we can start to see where is it coming from. What are the beliefs that we have in here that are programmed, that we're unaware of? It's not that hard to become aware of these beliefs, but it takes time. It's a layering process. So moving on to the loving adult, the next section here. The loving adult is like the emissary between spirit and child. So imagine that with one hand you're holding the hand of God or spirit or the universe, and with the other hand you're holding the hand of your inner child. And you're the one that takes action, because spirit can't take action. Spirit is spirit. It can't take any action. We can take action. So we are being a loving adult when our intention is to learn about loving ourselves, and we're connected with our higher source of love and truth. You see, so here's why intention is so important. Because the moment we choose the intention to protect against pain with some form of controlling behavior, we go right into our wounded self. That is what creates. Our intention creates our wounded self. But the moment our true intention is to learn to love ourselves so we can eventually share love with others, then that's when we become a loving adult. But it's moment by moment. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm going to be open from now on. It's not like that. It's moment by moment. It takes a lot of practice, because our default setting is the wounded self. That's what we've all learned to do. That's kind of automatic, unconscious place we go to as soon as we get scared or threatened or hurt. That's where we go. And that's what needs healing. And that's what gets healed as you learn and practice the inner bonding process. So let's go to the next page, the life paths chart. Okay, so as you can see, there are two paths. There's the earthly path of fear, and that's the path of the wounded self. And there's the spiritual path of love and courage, and that's the path of the loving adult. Now, we are beings of free will. We get to choose who we want to be at any given moment. So we get to choose to try and control in the face of fear, or we get to choose to open to learning about what's loving to ourselves and others, even in the face of fear. Fear does not have to determine what we do, because this is a scary planet, especially now, a lot of scary things. That doesn't mean that we have to be victims of that. We can still choose to be loving even in the face of fear, but it has to be a conscious choice. So I'm going to go right down this life paths chart, going back and forth to each side of the chart. So stay with me as we go down the chart. And so the purpose of the wounded self is to get love and avoid pain in order to feel safe. That's its whole purpose. But the purpose of the loving adult is to learn to love ourselves and be able to share that love with others. A completely different purpose. One is to get love. The other is to be love and share love. So the desire of the wounded self is to find our happiness, our safety, our lovability, and our worth externally, through people and things and activities and substances. So the wounded self goes like this. Am I okay? Do you like me? Am I doing a good job? You have to like me or I'm not okay. You see, this is what the wounded self does. It's external. It's making other people responsible for whether or not we're okay. And once we hand this responsibility to somebody else, then we have to try and control them. And we're going to be talking about all the different ways that we've learned to try and control. But as you can see on the chart, the desire of the loving adult is to find our joy, our peace, our safety, our lovability, our worth internally by connecting with our higher source of love and truth and bringing that down inside of us. Learning to fill ourselves with love so then we truly have love to share. If we're always out there trying to get love, there's an emptiness inside. If we're not really learning to bring love inside and really learning to love ourselves, we're empty. We don't have any love to share. And that's why you're trying to get love. But once you learn to love yourself, really bring love inside, then you feel all filled up. And then you have a deep desire to share that love with others. So again, the intention of the wounded self is to protect against pain and avoid responsibility for feeling it. And the intent of the loving adult is to learn to love and take responsibility for our own pain, our own joy, for all of our own feelings. Now you can see on the chart, there's black lines there that say the heart closes or the heart opens. And this is automatic. When the intention is to control, to protect, to avoid pain, our heart closes, our whole chakra system closes, we just clamp down. Everything closes down. When our intention is to learn about loving ourselves, we open. Everything gets expansive. And so you can start to tell what your intention is by how you're feeling. If you're feeling closed up inside, you know that your intention is to control. And if you're feeling a kind of freedom and expansiveness, you know that your intention is to learn about love and about truth. So I'd like you to take out a pen or pencil and look at this middle section here, reaction to fear, about what the wounded self does in reaction to fear, about all the addictive controlling behaviors. And please mark what you do when you're triggered into your wounded self. And please, no judgment. If you judge yourself for any of these, then your judgment is a major form of control and it will shut you down. We cannot learn when we judge. So please don't judge. We all do these things. We've all learned to do these things. We're not bad or wrong for doing them. It's just this is what we learned. And whoever marks the most wins. One of the things about the wounded self is it doesn't want to be unmasked. So it doesn't want you to know that you actually do these things to control or avoid or protect. So if you start to feel kind of uncomfortable inside, realize it's your wounded self saying, no, I don't do those things. No, we don't do those things. And then look at the line that says, fear increases. You feel more unsafe and insecure. The wounded self does these things to try and feel safe. But the problem is that these behaviors, while they might pacify for the moment, they make you feel more unsafe and insecure. It's like if a child comes to you upset and you just give the child a cookie and say, go watch TV, it pacifies the child for the moment, but whatever's going on has not been dealt with. And that's what happens when we turn to these addictive and controlling behaviors, is we're shoving things down. Yeah, you might eat the sugar and it feels better for the moment, or have the drink or the cigarette or yell at somebody or whatever, and it feels better for the moment, but you haven't handled the issue. And so you eventually feel more unsafe and more insecure. And then take a look at the bottom left of the chart. And again, mark what you experience as a result of what happens when your wounded self is in charge. And there is no way around these results, no way around these consequences. When we're operating out of our wounded self, this is how we're going to feel. This is going to be the result. Now, there is another reason for some of the feelings like anxiety and depression. When you're eating really badly, when you're eating sugar and you're eating the processed industrial seed oils like safflower and sunflower and all these, the oils that are not natural, and you're eating processed devitalized foods, and you're eating foods that are GMO, and you're eating foods that have been sprayed with pesticides, with Roundup, and you've got glyphosate in your system, what happens is that it destroys the balance in the gut. Our gut is the center of our immune system, about 80 to 85% of our immune system. And we have a whole other breed of beings living in there that keep us alive. But when we, have a lot of antibiotics or drugs or all the food, it disrupts the balance, and these bad bacteria take over. They proliferate and they take over. And when they do, they cause a lot of problems. They cause the lining of the gut to loosen up. It's supposed to stay tight so food can't get in it, but it causes the lining to loosen up like this. Food particles get in and it affects the organs. And in fact, they're finding that this is one of the major causes of cancer, heart disease, autoimmune disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of these degenerative diseases that have been proliferating, including autism, have been coming from this huge imbalance in the gut caused by so much of the food and the medications, the antibiotics. What also happens is that this toxicity, it creates these bad bacteria are very toxic, and they go up the vagus nerve and they go into the brain. That toxicity creates anxiety and depression. And so, whereas in the past, before all of this, if somebody got depressed, it was mainly either from childhood trauma that hadn't been dealt with, or it was from how they were treating themselves. But now, it's also from our food supply, which is very, very sad. In fact, I really want to recommend a movie to all of you. It just came out. It's a documentary. It's called Secret Ingredients. If you go to secretingredients.com, you will be able to see what's really happening with our food supply and why there's so much illness. It's really, really amazing. So now let's go over to the right side of the chart. Let's look at the reaction to fear of the loving adult. And so I'm going to briefly go through the inner bonding process. This is what I'm hoping that you're going to learn to turn to. Instead of automatically going to all those protective, controlling behaviors, with practice, you're going to start to turn to the 6 steps of inner bonding. Anytime you feel anything other than peace inside. So, step 1 of inner bonding is being aware, being present in your body with your feelings. Most of us learn to stay in our head. We learn to disconnect, to dissociate from our bodies, from our feelings, because we couldn't manage them. We could not manage the pain of childhood. Most of us just couldn't manage it. And so we learn to stay up in our head, and that's a form of self-abandonment, but it was a form of, it may have saved our lives, when we were little to not feel that much pain. So we had to learn to disconnect from it. Now we have to relearn to get back into our bodies. Because if you don't know what you feel, then how can you attend to it? And as I said, our feelings have so much information for us. You're going to want that information that your feelings have for you. You're not going to want to avoid. Once you realize how much vital information your feelings have for you, you're going to want those feelings. And so step one is moving into being present in the body, being aware of what you feel. What I call having your inner baby monitor on. And it's like if you have a baby and you want to be a good parent, you don't just put the baby to sleep and go out to lunch. You've got a baby monitor on, and the minute that baby wakes up and cries, you're there, you're attending. Because the baby's cry is information. It's saying, I'm hungry, I'm wet, I'm scared, I feel alone. The baby needs something. And so the baby's cry is information. Well, we've got that inner child giving us information. Anytime we feel anything less than peace, that's information. And we need to learn to attend to that. So step one is took me a long time, because as I said, I was very external. It took me a long time to learn to get present. Now, I know the second there's anything other than peace going on inside. Step two is learning to move into your heart, which is the seat of the loving adult, and open to learning. And invite the love and compassion and truth and wisdom, kindness of spirit into your heart so that you become a loving adult. Just like if a baby was crying, you would want to be a loving adult. Well, with your inner child, if there's something less than peace, you want to be a loving adult. So in step two, we become a loving adult. We open to learning, and we bring in the compassion, the love of spirit. In step three, it's a dialogue process. We go in, and let's say you realize that you're feeling anxious. So it's a dialogue process where you're saying to the part that's anxious, what am I telling you? How am I treating you? What am I doing or not doing that's causing you to feel this way? This is about learning to take responsibility for our feelings. So let's say that the inner child says, well, you're putting pressure on me. You're telling me that I've got to do this perfectly. I can't make a mistake. That you're not going to love me, that I'm not going to be okay unless this person gives me approval or that person gives me approval. So of course I feel anxious. Like if you told a child before going to a party, now, you got to do everything right, and you got to act right, and you got to say things right, and you got this right. The child's going to be a wreck. Well, that's what happens on the inner level when we put this kind of pressure on ourselves, when we judge ourselves. We create the anxiety. Or the depression, or the guilt, or the shame. So many different feelings that we're creating. So once you understand, okay, the reason I'm feeling anxious is I'm telling myself that I've got to be perfect. Well, then you go a little deeper to the wounded self, because it's the wounded self that has the belief that if only you're perfect, then you'll get the approval you need, and then you'll be okay. Then you'll get the love you need, and then you'll be okay. And so then we want to go down to that level of the wounded self to see where did we learn that? And why do we continue to think that we can have control over how people feel about us by being perfect or saying the right thing or looking right or making this much money or having this kind of job or this kind of car or this kind of house or whatever? Why do we continue to believe that when what it's doing is creating anxiety? And so we're taking a look at these beliefs that we've been operating from without realizing it. And so once we get a full picture of how we're treating ourselves, what we're telling ourselves, what the beliefs are, then we go to step 4. And step 4 is basically asking 2 questions. One is, what is the truth about this false belief or these false beliefs that I've uncovered, and what would be loving to myself? So let's say I've come upon the belief that, oh, if only I'm perfect, then I'll be okay and I'll get love. And I say to Spirit, well, is that true? And when you get really connected, Spirit will say, well, first of all, what you think is perfect, somebody else might not think is perfect at all. So, what does perfect mean? And secondly, can somebody have control over how you feel about them? Or do you just decide for yourself? So what makes you think you can have control over how other people feel about you? And so we're going to get information. We're going to get information about what's true. And then we're going to get information about what's loving. And Spirit might say, well, what you need to do is start to become aware of when you're being judgmental and start to practice moving into compassion. That's a practice. To move into compassion for our feelings, to move into compassion for who we are, rather than being judgmental. That would be a loving action. There's thousands of loving actions. There's all kinds of things depending upon the issue. I'm just using this as a little example. So step 5 would then be taking the loving action, whatever it would be. We would take that action, and then in step 6 we would go back in and see how do we feel as a result of taking this loving action. And if indeed you've taken a loving action, you're going to feel relief. There's going to be a, that's how you know you've taken a loving action. And it's so quick. It happens so quick. It's amazing what happens when you take a loving action. You just go, just feels so good when we do that for ourselves. Okay, those are the 6 steps. That's what you're going to be learning this weekend. Now, as you look at the chart, I'd like you to see that fear resolves. You start to feel more safe and secure, and look at the results of what happens the more and more you start operating as a loving adult.